Dear students, welcome to our YouTube channel A Vision. Here you will find practice material for PTE. If you like our videos, then please subscribe our channel. Thank you.
In 1957, the Soviet satellite Sputnik 1 joined the Moon in orbit around the Earth. Although it only operated for 21 days, it began the space race, and shortly after a number of American and other Russian rockets were put into orbit, progressing cartography into an even more sophisticated realm. Only a few years later, in 1959, the first space photograph of Earth was received. Pagios 1, launched by the United States in 1966, was the first satellite with an instrument package on board specifically designed for surveying the Earth. 2 years later, the American SatNav system was launched utilizing 6 carefully positioned transit satellites which fed back information for mapping based upon the Doppler effect. The Landsat-1 satellite launched in 1972 was the first satellite to collect data specifically on the Earth's surface and natural resources. More than 20 other equally spaced satellites now orbit the Earth every 12 hours at an altitude of 20,000 kilometers. Navstar, the U.S. military's global positioning system, can determine geodesic positioning accurate within millimeters anywhere on Earth. What took months to plot and record in the past can now be easily done in an hour.
One of the biggest influences upon map creation or cartography was World War II. In the war zone, maps of targets and terrain played a huge part, and so topographers and members of the Air Force alike were engaged in the production of them. The need to accurately measure distances using air photos gave birth to the process of photogrammetry. Great cartographic and mathematical skill was required in a process that was initially limited by a lack of photographic coverage. Planes flying at a constant altitude flew in grid patterns with cameras mounted on them, facing straight down. When the weather was good, this process provided photos in the perpendicular axis, the preferred optical axis for mapping. In order to include both sides of the horizon, some cameras were specially designed to take 3 pictures at once, 1 vertical and 2 side-looking obliques. Other parts of the human body which tend to suffer from exposure to the sun are the eyes and hair. Many years ago, optometrists undertook studies in America to examine the influence of the sun upon the eyes by studying Atlantic City lifeguards, and found that even a few hours in the bright sun without sunglasses could cause a significant loss of vision, a loss that might take several weeks from which to recover. So gradual was the change that the lifeguards were unaware that their sight had been affected. The solution to this problem was to introduce sunglasses as a standard part of the lifeguard uniform. These were dark enough to absorb the sun's harmful UV rays and most of its infrared and ultraviolet rays. Of a lesser impact is the effect of the sun upon hair. The penalty of the sun's parching is a brittle dryness. Hair care professionals recommend a nutritional cream treatment with a substance containing lanolin to bring your hair back its natural softness. These usually come in the form of leave-in conditioners, and should be applied frequently, just as you would a sunscreen for the skin. Or, easier still, wear a hat. Wearing a hat has a dual effect: it protects the hair and helps to prevent the most dangerous of outdoor afflictions, sunstroke. The medical world appears to be divided on the effects of the sun upon the human body. From statements like, "there is no known relationship between a tan and health," to, "perhaps sun-tanned skin absorbs the ultraviolet rays and converts them into healthful energy," there are some things which are still the topic of research. Doctors agree on one of the benefits of the sun: vitamin D. It is well known that vitamin D is acquired from the direct rays of the sun, an entirely separate miracle from sun tanning. The sun's ultraviolet rays penetrate only a tiny amount into the human skin, but in the process they irradiate an element in the skin called ergosterol, which is the substance that stores up reserves of vitamin D received from the sun. This is both healthful and beneficial for human skin.
Over many years of study, dermatologists have proven that excessive exposure to sunlight over a period of years is responsible for a large proportion of skin cancer amongst the population. Those with the greatest chance of doing permanent damage to their skin are the year-round outdoor workers, 90% of which occurs on the heavily exposed hands and face. The first line of defense against permanent sun damage is the skin's own natural fatty matter and sweat, which combine to form an oily acid surface shield against the ultraviolet rays. At the beach, the salt water washes away this natural oily coat. The hot sun overworks the sweat glands so that the excess becomes ineffective, and the dry wind and hot sun combine to dehydrate the skin itself. Over the years, women have shown far greater wisdom in the care of their skin than men. Since the ladies of ancient Egypt first began to apply the fat of the so-called sacred temple cats to their faces, women have been tireless in waging this battle against damage to the skin from the sun. Both sexes now contribute annually to a multimillion-dollar global sunscreen business.
As demand for food and competition for land rises, it is vital that crop losses are limited. Chemical protection has provided effective control of crop losses in recent years. Alongside chemical fertilizer and improved crop genetics, it has helped to increase crop yields dramatically over the last 6 decades. However, there is now a need to develop complementary alternatives, and researchers from the Rural Economy in Land Use program have been exploring the potential of, and barriers to, alternative pest management approaches. Alternatives to chemical pesticide are needed because overuse of them leads to pesticide resistance and affects biodiversity in water quality, says Dr. Alistair Bailey. Heightened EU regulations are also leading to the withdrawal of many pesticide products. Hence, complementary approaches are required to reduce use and preserve the efficacy of those valuable pesticides that are still available to sustain food production systems.
The environmental impact of the global textile industry is hard to overstate. 1/3 of the water used worldwide is spent fashioning fabrics. For every ton of cloth produced, 200 tons of water is polluted with chemicals and heavy metals. An estimated 1 trillion kilowatt-hours of electricity powers the factories that card and comb, spin and weave, and cut and stitch materials into everything from t-shirts to towels, leaving behind mountains of solid waste and a massive carbon footprint. Where the industry is today is not really sustainable for the long term, says Shreyaskar Chaudhary, Chief Executive of Pratibha Syntex, a textile manufacturer based outside Indore, India. With something of an, if you build it, they will come, attitude, Mr. Chaudhary has steered Pratibha toward the leading edge of eco-friendly textile production. Under his direction, Pratibha began making clothes with organic cotton in 1999. Initially, the company couldn't find enough organic farms growing cotton in central India to supply its factories. To meet production demands, Chaudhary's team had to convince conventional cotton farmers to change their growing methods.
Recently, management of purple loosestrife, Lythrum salicaria, has been criticized for lack of evidence demonstrating negative impacts of L. salicaria, and management using biocontrol for lack of evidence documenting the failure of conventional control methods. Although little quantitative evidence on negative impacts on native wetland biota and wetland function was available at the onset of the control program in 1985. Recent work has demonstrated that the invasion of purple loosestrife into North American freshwater wetlands alters decomposition rates and nutrient cycling, leads to reductions in wetland plant diversity, reduces pollination and seed output of the native Lythrum alatum, and reduces habitat suitability for specialized wetland bird species such as black terns, least bitterns, pied-billed grebes, and marsh wrens. Conventional methods, physical, mechanical or chemical, have continuously failed to curb the spread of purple loosestrife or to provide satisfactory control.
A Civil War reenactment is in part a memorial service. It is partly, too, a leisure activity. Furthermore, most reenactors assert an educational import to the performance, and to develop their roles, many pursue archival research with a rare dedication. On the other hand, Civil War reenactments are increasingly commercial spectacles, with as many as 50,000 Americans routinely gathering at, or near, historical Civil War battlefields in order to stage performances that purport to recreate the conflict, while hundreds of thousands more spectate, had in 1996. 5. I will show how theoretical issues of authenticity arise as practical problems in the Civil War reenactment community by presenting my own observations from the 2006 Gettysburg reenactment and by relying on a number of texts produced by participant observers. In particular, will refer to Robert Lee Hodge, who was made famous by Tony Howitzer's 1996 book, Confederates in the Attic, and who served as a kind of Virgil to the author on his journey through a Confederate Valhalla. From these sources, I will argue that living history performances require an interpretive apparatus that takes genuine history as its authority, while remaining external to both participants and tourists, who may well be unaware of how closely their own involvement approximates genuine historical events.
The Australian Renewable Energy Agency, ARENA, has awarded $2.49 million to cover a portion of the cost of a collaborative project led by the Australian Maritime College at the University of Tasmania, in partnership with the University of Queensland and CSIRO. The $5.85 million, Tidal Energy in Australia, Assessing Resource and Feasibility to Australia's Future Energy Mix, project will map the country's tidal energy in unprecedented detail before assessing its ability to contribute to Australia's energy needs. Lead Chief Investigator Associate Professor Irene Pennesis from the University of Tasmania said the project would help overcome barriers to investment in commercial-scale tidal farms in Australia. With some of the largest tides in the world, Australia is ideal for this extremely reliable and low-carbon form of energy, she said.
Emerald is defined by its green color. To be an emerald, a specimen must have a distinctly green color that falls in the range from bluish green to slightly yellowish green. To be an emerald, the specimen must also have a rich color. Stones with weak saturation or light tone should be called green beryl. If the beryl's color is greenish blue, then it is an aquamarine. If it is greenish yellow, it is heliodor. This color definition is a source of confusion. Which hue, tone, and saturation combinations are the dividing lines between green beryl and emerald? Professionals in the gem and jewelry trade can disagree on where the lines should be drawn. Some believe that the name emerald should be used when chromium is the cause of the green color, and that stones colored by vanadium should be called green beryl. Calling a gem an emerald instead of a green beryl can have a significant impact upon its price and marketability. This color confusion exists within the United States. In some other countries, any beryl with a green color, no matter how faint, is called an emerald. Leonard Lauder, chief executive of the company his mother founded, says she always thought she was growing a nice little business. And that it is. A little business that controls 45% of the cosmetics market in US department stores. A little business that sells in 118 countries and last year grew to be $3.6 billion big in sales. The Lauder family's shares are worth more than $6 billion. But early on, there wasn't a burgeoning business, there weren't houses in New York, Palm Beach, Florida, or the south of France. It is said that at one point there was one person to answer the telephones who changed her voice to become the shipping or billing department as needed. You more or less know the Estee Lauder story because it's a chapter from the Book of American Business Folklore. In short, Josephine Esther Metzer, daughter of immigrants, lived above her father's hardware store in Corona, a section of Queens in New York City. She started her enterprise by selling skin creams concocted by her uncle, a chemist, in beauty shops, beach clubs and resorts. No doubt the portions were good. Estee Lauder was a quality fanatic, but the saleslady was better.
There were 26 freshmen majoring in English at Beijing Language Institute in the class of 1983. I was assigned to Group 2 with another 11 boys and girls who has come from big cities in China. I was told that language study required smallness so that we would each get more attention from the skillful teachers. The better the school, the smaller the class. I realized that my classmates were already all talking in English, simple sentences tossed out to each other in their red-faced introductions and carefree chatting. Their intonations were curving and dramatic and their pronunciation refined and accurate. But as I stretched to catch the drips and drops of their humming dialogue, I couldn't understand it all, only that it was English. Those words now flying before me sounded a little familiar. I had read them and tried to speak them, but I had never heard them spoken back to me in such a speedy, fluent manner. My big plan of beating the city folks was thawing before my eyes.